Hello and welcome back to School Life Unpacked, the show where we dive into all things that make school, school. I'm your host, Natasha Curtis-Ego, and today we're unpacking something incredibly important, eye-opening, and honestly pretty awesome. We are talking autism and neurodiversity, what it is, why it matters, and how we can create schools and communities where every brain is celebrated. Whether you're a parent, a teacher, a student, or someone who just loves learning more about amazing varieties of human minds, this episode is for you. We're joined today by an amazing expert who is going to inform us, enlighten us, and bust a few myths so that we know a little bit more. Could you kindly introduce yourself, please?
Yes, hello, I'm Sarah Bell. I'm an autism specialist teacher. You've set the bar quite high, the expectation there, Natasha, on what it is that I'm going to be able to do today.
I was privileged enough to come to one of your sessions at our school, and my mind was blown. So that's why I asked you here today, because I feel like we could have a really wonderful conversation, because there's so much we don't know and so much we can learn, and little things can just make life so much easier for everybody. If we know a little bit more, it makes us better people.
Yeah, and I'm always happy to spread the word and fly the flag for not just autism, but, other neurodivergent conditions, because I find after being in autism for 10 years that many children I work with have more than one neurodivergent condition. So they may be autistic, but they may also have a diagnosis of ADHD, or there may be learning needs going on there with dyslexia or dyscalculia. So, movement needs, sensory needs. Some of these kids have got a huge amount going on, and I think it's really important to be able to talk freely about that and honestly about that, whether that's with staff or with parents or with the young people themselves. I'm very passionate about what I do.
And it came across. So I'm hoping that today's episode, people will hear the same thing. So could you tell us a little bit about your journey and how you ended up becoming an autism specialist?
Yeah. So I started teaching in 1994. If anybody's listening was born after that, I don't want to know, because it seems a very long time ago now. So I started teaching in a primary school. I've taught reception all the way up to year 6, which I think is a very good thing to have within your career, because you see all those developmental stages. I started off with the older children, and then I went on maternity leave and had my son, and came back to reception thinking I haven't got a clue what I'm doing, because I'd seen year 5 and 6 children. I hadn't taught any of them to read, and now I'm at reception. So I had to learn quite quickly. I think actually it makes you a more adaptable teacher to have all of that experience. And then I was offered the special needs coordinator, or SENCO, role. In those days, I'm talking 27 years ago, in those days it was like the little part-time SEN job. It didn't have the value and the accreditation that it has now. It's a lot more involved now than it was when I first started. But I realised that actually that was a passion that I didn't realise that I had, was to help those that were, struggling a bit in school or had particular needs. So I spent time as a SENCO almost as long as my teaching career, really, in and out of different places being SENCO. And then 10 years ago, I saw the opportunity to apply for an autism specialist teacher job for the local authority, which was Essex. I applied because I needed a new challenge. I applied thinking I'm not sure that autism is really my bag. 2 weeks into the job, I was completely hooked.
What made you excited about it?
I just was fascinated by some of the children that I saw. I mean, my first school visit with a colleague of mine, who I still work with occasionally, the wonderful Maggie, who's always been my guru. I went on a school visit with her because she was handing her caseload over to me, and I met a little boy, and he took an absolute instant like to me. I was like, oh my God, I've only been in the job 2 weeks. I've cracked it. The reason was that he really liked the colour green, and my coat was green. It was nothing to do with me whatsoever. His favourite food was broccoli, which was green. I had this lovely bright green coat, Marks and Spencer's. And I thought, oh my gosh, I've read this situation so differently than what's really happening. And it just fascinated me. I was very fortunate in that job to be put through a master's degree. Okay. So I did my Master of Education in Autism for Children while I was there. And that's where the autism specialism comes from, is that level of learning, obviously that much higher level of learning. My first assignment, I literally just scraped pass Remember, I hadn't been in, done really any study for a very long time. But I did actually leave with a merit, and I got a distinction for my dissertation. So I was quite proud of myself at the age of 49 to say that I'd achieved that. And really, you can't look back from there. I wouldn't say pigeonholed myself. I know I have in a way, but I know this sounds really cliched and cheesy, but it's true. I learn something new every time I meet a new young person. And I think that's what excites me. When I was at university studying to be a teacher, 30 odd years ago, one of the lecturers said, the day you think you know it all is the day you get out.
I love that.
And I'm still here.
I think that's... No, but it kind of makes you realise that when you get to the point where you think, oh, I've done it all, seen it all, it's the end of whatever you're in.
Yes, absolutely. And that's stuck with me for over 30 years. And I don't think I'll ever have learned enough about autism, because there's so much to know, and it's changing. Every time you meet a new young person, you learn something new. I work mainly now with teenagers, okay. And that's not where I saw my journey going in education. But I mainly work now with teenagers on a one-to-one basis, talking about their diagnosis, exploring that with them. It's very powerful work. I'm very proud of that part of my work. But every time I meet someone, they bring something new to the table. And I think, do you know what? I hadn't seen it like that before, but you've brought that to me, and that makes me think as well. I mean, so I've done quite a lot of things in my career, really. And as I said to you earlier, I like to call it my professional mixing bowl. So if I go into an infant classroom, I've been an infant teacher, I kind of get it. If I go into a year 6 classroom, I've done that, I kind of get it. If I'm talking to a Senko, I bring out a bit of Senko knowledge, and I'm a parent. Well, so yeah, professional mixing bowl's done me quite well, really.
What is autism? Let's start there, because I think the term, we hear it and we may know a little bit about it, but actually it's much bigger.
Yeah, and I think it's such a wide spectrum, so that may be a word that people have heard. I was saying to you earlier, actually, wasn't I, that I haven't actually really met a child that I didn't think was autistic, diagnosed or undiagnosed, although I don't diagnose myself. But autism is a neurodivergent condition, so we have different brain types, okay? First of all, we're all neurodiverse, all of us. Me, you, the child that I worked with yesterday, the parents that were on my course last night, because we all have our own different brain, which is unique. Nobody's the same as us. But within that, we have different brain types. So we have a neurotypical brain type. I would call myself a neurotypical person. My brain has developed like most people. Most people think like me. Yes, I'm my own person and I have my own thoughts, but I'm kind of within that sort of mainstream kind of, thinking. So what happens there for neurotypical people is that the world is actually set up for us because it's the most common brain type. And then we have the neurodivergent brain type. So the brain type where different patterns of thinking have formed around certain things. There are less people that are neurodivergent than neurotypical. And this includes conditions such as autism, which is my specialism, but inevitably I deal with young people with more than one condition. So ADHD as well, dyslexia, Tourette's, dyspraxia, which is a movement coordination difference. So the processing of the movement from the brain to the limbs is different, and to the body is different. And dyscalculia, which is to do with numbers. So how the brain processes numbers.
I didn't know there was. I've never heard, you mentioned it earlier and I was like, I don't even know what that is.
Well, now you do.
Now I do. I've learned something new.
It was worth doing the podcast just for that.
Definitely.
But yeah, so, and quite often I meet children that have got, more than one condition. So that neurodivergence means that these people are living in a world that is not set up for their brain type. That makes life quite hard. And I always say to the young people that I work with that actually it's not you that is difficult. You find yourselves in difficult situations because you're trying to navigate a world that doesn't make sense in the same way. I see lots of young people who actually say, I had one 2 weeks ago, or 3 weeks ago before half term, Sarah, I just want to know what's wrong with me. I'm like, there's nothing wrong with you. And I think it's very important that we acknowledge with our young people that, this is just a different brain type. And how do we kind of cater for that? With autism itself, it is a neurodivergent condition. It's to do with the brain. It's how a person communicates with the world, understands the world around them, how they interact and how they act within that. There are more boys diagnosed than girls. This is a very changing trend. So in the last 10 years since I've worked within autism, it's gone from 4 boys to every 1 girl, and now it's gone to 3 boys to 1 girl. And I'm hoping that within my lifetime, within autism, it will change again. I mean, that's a whole podcast on its own, Natasha.
I was just going to say, why is that? You can see from my face. So do you think, why are more boys diagnosed?
I mean, there's a number of reasons. I mean, the autism diagnostic process is very boy biased to start with. There is now other ways of diagnosing that are more attuned to girls and how girls act. Girls their main drive is to come across as neurotypical as possible. So it's about, girls they notice the social, they try to mimic and they try to fit in. So what happens is that you won't see, because they do something called masking. Boys can do it as well, but it's very common within girls that they will mask those difficulties that they have in order to come across as neurotypical as possible. So that may mean that they're shy. They're just shy. It may be that they copy the person next to them. They really rely on that best friend. Yeah. I mean, this is very general, there's a lot more to it than that really, but females are programmed with more social genes than males, which means that girls pick up on some of those social things. They're watchers, so they watch and they copy. And, and this is where that phrase, she's fine in school, comes from, because actually they do look fine in school.
Yeah.
Unless someone like me goes in and sees all those clues, those little tiny clues. A lot of the girls that I work with, because as I said, I work mainly with teenagers now, have a late diagnosis. So they're kind of 13, 14, 15, even older, and they've just got their diagnosis. So working with a year 11 who's doing their GCSEs and, got an autism diagnosis 6 months ago.
Oh, wow.
So quite often the girls are missed. In my experience, they're more likely to have a mental health crisis, which is seen first, because they've spent all that time trying to hold it in. How draining is that, to try to be somebody different? It's
the pressure in the bottle, isn't it? It's just building up.
Absolutely, the pressure, absolutely. They've masked for so long, they've kept it together for so long that actually at some point they're going to burn out. So, a lot of the girls I've seen have had a mental health crisis. And a little fact I'm going to share with you, which I know one of my longest term students, I say student, she's told me she's definitely going to be listening to this. So this fact is for her. So I hope it makes you smile. I won't say her name, she'll remain anonymous, but 80% of autistic women are undiagnosed at 18.
That's so sad.
That's a lot, isn't it? So how do we put in support if we don't know the need is there?
But hopefully with bringing awareness to it.
Oh, absolutely.
But then are we looking more? I don't know what the solution is, because you don't want to...
It's a fine balance, isn't it?
Yeah.
It's a fine balance, yeah. I mean, quite often, if they've been working with mental health team, it may be mental health that says, have you considered this may be autism? But there's for girls, there's this good girl programming. They're programmed to be a good girl. So no one notices them. They're not in the spotlight. They keep out of the spotlight in order to just make it through.
And then I suppose you get labelled, don't you? If you start acting out of any norm, people were like, oh, they're just naughty, they're acting out.
They're naughty, one lad, it breaks my heart really, who I saw quite a long time ago, he said, I'm just weird.
Oh,
I was like, well, there may be reasons. There's always a reason. I'm very passionate. So we're kind of going on to another thing,
Yeah, that's
really,
okay.
but I'm very passionate about young people knowing about their diagnosis.
Yeah.
I think what happens is if they don't know, they fill that narrative in for themselves. So, yes, I'm talking to 14, 15-year-olds, but they said, I knew at primary school that there was something wrong with me, is what they normally say. So we try to change that to, I felt different to other people. And it's not about getting a label. It's about a valid diagnosis that explains why things have been challenging for you, or why you're so particularly good at one thing or another, why you're so interested, why you have so much knowledge about that but can't take in information about other things. And I hope that the work that I do gives those young people, the confidence and the self-esteem to be able to advocate for themselves, to be able to go into college or a workplace when they're older and say, I'm autistic and I need this bit done differently, so it helps me.
So it's understanding your diagnosis, but knowing that it's not a negative. It's
Absolutely.
just bringing an awareness to how you process, because it's normal. It's normal to you. And therefore, just because somebody who doesn't have your brain type doesn't understand, doesn't mean you can't explain it to them so they have a better understanding.
Yeah, absolutely. But I always say, it's a reason, it's not an excuse. So not an excuse to just go off and do whatever you fancy, but it is a reason why you might need things done differently for you. As a very, very simple example, I'm left-handed. If I had right-handed scissors, it would be carnage. And I'd look as if I wasn't able to do that. Whereas actually, give me the right equipment and I can. So very small example, but I like to think, give the kids the right equipment and they can. Give them the right information about themselves and they can. And I love them all.
No, it's really interesting and exciting to hear that perspective of actually it's just the right information and the right tools to be able to navigate in a world that isn't built for you yet. Because hopefully if people are aware, we can make changes, and there might be little changes.
I do think it is changing.
Yeah.
I do think it is changing. I mean, even when I was at the airport on, coming back from holiday, there were children with sunflower lanyards. Been a long week. With ear defenders on and yes, they should go through that boarding process quicker because it is harder to stand there and, with all the crowds and the noise, etc. So, and I think people recognise that. We are changing. There's some great programmes out there as well. If anybody is interested in watching things about autism, I would say Chris Packham's documentary, Inside Our Autistic Minds. He's just done an ADHD one and a dyslexia one. Very interesting and very insightful, and, showing that autism is a real spectrum. And, we've got lots of people that are all very different and unique within that spectrum. So, yeah.
As a new parent, we've been looking at getting children transitioned into school. As a new parent getting ready for reception, what would be your advice if they had any thoughts that actually my child may need extra support? What would be your advice to them? I
think because it's a long time since I've done transition into school work, to be fair. But are you being open with the school? Is the school willing to listen with you? I think that a partnership with the school is very important, because lots of schools really do the best that they can with the time, the resources, the money, etc. that they have, and they're not always going to get it right. As a teacher, I didn't always get it right. As a Senko, I didn't always get it right. Even as an autism specialist, I didn't. We're not perfect. We can't meet every single need. But I think sometimes you as a parent are going to get it wrong, and sometimes them as a school are going to get it wrong. And I think as long as you understand that and you build a good relationship with the school, your Senko, Special Educational Needs Coordinator, should be your point of contact.
So this is if you've already had a diagnosis?
No,
or is this if you have any concerns?
I think it's if you have concerns.
Okay.
I mean, if you've been to, nursery, then we would hope that things are noticed there. and that information transfers over to, in an ideal world, that information would transfer over. I mean, you may have speech and language therapist involved. Maybe it might not be autism, but you may have speech and language involved. So, it's important to always share that information. Your health visitor, does that happen nowadays? It used to. Pre-COVID, your health visitor may have advised that or put you forward for, autism diagnosis. I don't want to give wrong information, but before COVID, that used to happen. It may have changed now. What does your school offer for you as the parent of a child with a special need, either diagnosed or undiagnosed? Are there things like coffee mornings? Are there things like Meet the Senko? Are there opportunities for you to network with other parents? Because it can be very lonely.
Yes, that came out so I was, like I said earlier, privileged to come to one session, and I met other parents who I could see the networking and the relief that they're not on their own. And I didn't realise how isolated parents can feel.
Yes, I think parents can be very isolated for a number of reasons. One, there may be, high anxiety. You've got a child who, when you're pregnant, you have all these dreams of what your child is going to achieve. They're going to be a doctor, they're going to, be a billionaire and look after you in your old age and all this kind of stuff. No, joking aside, you have plans and dreams for your child. And then when your child is diagnosed or, you're waiting for a diagnosis of a special need, actually, those dreams have to become different. There's a really lovely piece of writing, and I wish that I could remember who wrote it. It's called Welcome to Holland, and it talks about the journey as if what it's like for a special need parent. In that you plan you're going to Italy, you learn the language, you look up where you're going, it looks beautiful, and you've got all the what the weather's going to be like, and you've bought your clothes and all this business, and then as the plane lands, the pilot says, "Welcome to Holland." You think, well, I didn't expect to be here. I don't know the language. Don't know anything about it. I've now got to suddenly learn something different to what I expected. It's a great piece of writing. I really wish I could remember
if you
who wrote
before
it.
your episode goes live, I can always pop it on in the link.
Yeah, I mean, if you put in Welcome to Holland on a Google search, it will come up. I actually find it a really emotional read, and I've read it hundreds of times. But I think, so it can be very isolating for a parent. So you can have high anxiety, you can be on a journey that you didn't expect to be on. And I also think if your child has a very external presentation of autism, so by that I mean you see it there in front of you, and your child at a very young age who doesn't have the communication levels will always use their behaviour to express how they're feeling. Actually, you can find yourself being avoided by other parents. I'm not going to sugarcoat it. That happens.
Oh, because they don't understand it, and they don't know how to cope themselves. I find that even if your child is slightly more boisterous, you get avoided a little bit because they're like, that one will cause a...
Or telling children keep away from that child because, it happens. This is real life. So actually you can feel very isolated as a parent. And I think that you can go to extremes. We talked about this before we started recording, actually. Go to extremes of thinking that no one's going to believe you. Yeah. So I've been asked many times, do you want to see a video of my child having a meltdown? And I'm like, no. But the reason that people do that is because they think they're not going to be believed. So if I show somebody from school this video, then they'll believe how difficult, and we're facing a lot of challenges. I just think, wouldn't it be nice if people didn't feel they had to do that?
Do you find that's more common when a child is able to mask their behaviour in school and be completely compliant, and then they get home and it's...
Yeah, there's definitely a trend that links together. But I just think if I was having my worst moment of the day, I wouldn't want somebody videoing me to show it to someone else. And I think we have to think, how can we advocate for our children that may be, a different way? To summarise, because I've gone off on a tangent, which I'm very good at doing, is, build that relationship with the school, make yourself known. You can be that parent without being that parent. At the end of the day, you know your child better than anyone, and what you want is for your child to be happy and successful, and you're the only one that can really advocate for your child. But how are you going to do that in a way that means that you're working with school rather than against school? And knowing that in the real world, schools can't do everything. They try, but they're not superhuman.
No, and they haven't got the resources. I mean, I'm sure there's lots of schools would love to be able to do if they could, but they're limited, and they're limited by all sorts of constraints, not just resources.
Yes, yeah, definitely.
With staff, I know they get trained, and do you find that training is enough to be able to be relayed to parents? So we have a Senko, but I'm not in that world, so I don't know what they do and how they support parents. So I guess I'm trying to find out a little bit more
about the Senko role.
A little bit.
Yeah, so I've been a Senko as I've done it. So special educational needs coordinator is that they coordinate the special needs within the school. Okay. So it is admin, it is knowing the children. It's about preparing paperwork for education, health and care plans. It's about monitoring the assessment and the progress and that of the children that are on your special needs register.
There's a register.
Okay. Well, the register. But no, that list of children that need extra help. And there's different levels of need as well. So not every child that has has a diagnosis of autism or has a special need needs an education, health and care plan.
Oh, that's interesting.
Yeah, so that's for a high needs level. Okay. So as a Senko, you're coordinating, that side of the higher level. But there's also those children that need support, but it kind of comes under a lower level of SEND support and is really down to the teachers to differentiate within their classroom for those young people.
I didn't know that. So not everybody needs the plan.
No, and not everybody will get the plan. I mean, an education, health and care plan is a statutory, document. It gives your child's rights to particular levels of support, but it's not something that every child with a special needs has.
Do they need it? Is it that they don't have it because you don't need it?
You don't need it. You wouldn't meet the criteria level. So you have to have a certain level within SEN, special educational needs, in order to, you can apply and you might get rejected and say that it doesn't meet, or there's not enough evidence, or child doesn't meet the criteria. But no, it's not a given. It's a big fight. Quite often. It's a lot of paperwork, a lot of preparation. There's lots of time scales that go with it. Certain things have got to be done within a certain time frame. It might not be agreed. It might be declined. If it is agreed, then, you'll have an assessment from an educational psychologist, your child with an educational psychologist. And then there's an outcomes meeting and the paperwork is drawn up. And it's very involved. You should get a Senko on actually to explain it in better detail.
That sounds like a good idea. I may we have one at school. Yeah, we have one at our school, so I may see if she would be interested. Because I think me not knowing anything, I would just assume that you get assessed, then you get a healthcare plan, and then it allows you to get your child support. But I didn't realise that there's a whole little channel of...
Nothing's easy, Natasha. This is why parents, I think, just find that all they're doing is fighting within the system to advocate for their child. Quite stressful. And I think this is why parent groups, parents that can support each other, is really important, because there's many people that are kind of going through that EHCP, education, health and care plan process. And, and it is frustrating and it is anxiety building, and you need to have other people to talk to that are kind of in the same situation.
Yeah, because if you're not going through it, you don't necessarily understand how pressured it is.
And I do think you've actually brought up quite a common point, is that you don't know as a parent until you're thrown into this world, and you need that relationship with school, or your child needs something above what's ordinarily available. And, how do you navigate that? Like, you're dropped and it's sink or swim.
Yeah, which is very intense.
Yeah, it is. And there are some really good charities in this area that provide support. So you've got Little Heroes, which you may have heard of. Kim there does an absolutely fantastic job. So they are support for this area. And then you've got Send the Right Message in Southend, which is run by a parent actually who I've known for many years now, Maggie. Fantastic job over there. They do, they have talks and workshops and things for parents and provide a lot of, look these people up on Facebook and see what they've got on offer. You also have the Mega Centre in Rayleigh. I know that's a bit further out for this area, but they also do lots of Send sessions there and sometimes have guest speakers. Some of them have been ex-colleagues of mine from the local authority because we all kind of role there stopped in 2019 and many of us have gone independent. And then a bit further out, but you've got SNAP in Brentwood with special needs and parents. Okay. That's been running for many years. Yeah. When I first became a Senko, that was running, so that's nearly 30 years ago. Again, talks, colleagues of mine from my local authority job do talks there. There's a library, Sen Library, lots on offer. So parents really, if they can, they feel a bit lost. Yeah. There are things, but nobody tells you. It's almost like you're in the forest and you're like trying to navigate through the trees.
I agree with that. I think that was the main purpose of my podcast, is in trying to get the right information out so that people have like a little starting point, and then if they want to dig deeper, they can. Yes. Because there's a lot of misinformation.
Absolutely.
And there's a lot of unavailable information. It's available, but we don't know where to get it.
Yes. So it's available if you know about it.
Yes.
But how do you get to know about it? Yeah.
That's the catch, isn't it? You talked a little bit earlier about sensory environments and things. Maybe talk a little bit about that. Is that okay?
Yeah. I mean, sensory processing is part of the diagnostic criteria for autism.
Okay. May I ask what the criteria is? If you could answer it brief, like just a rough.
So for autism, you're looking at social and communication differences and repetitive behaviours, those type of differences. I've actually used a broken down version of that, which came from the Autism Education Trust. I did my master's dissertation actually on this. Breaks it down into 4 key areas of difference.
Okay.
So anybody with an autism diagnosis or on the pathway will have differences in these 4 areas. And I find this a very useful way to talk about autism. So differences in social and emotional processing, communication, information processing, and sensory processing. It doesn't mean to say that a person can't do these things. It means how they do them is different because different patterns of thinking have formed within those areas. I find that more useful actually than looking at the diagnostic criteria because it's kind of laypersons, everyone can understand it. And actually I use those 4 areas. I'm going off the point. I will come back, I promise. I use those 4 areas with parents on my parent course that I run. I use it within schools. I use it within consultations. That's where it first started, my interest in those 4 areas, because I'd have schools come for consultations and they'd just go, oh, everything's so awful, blah, 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 blah. And I'm like, oh, hang on a minute, I've got to put a little bit of order around this. Yeah. So I started to use those 4 key areas of difference because it was in a training that we used to offer. And it was like, oh, tell me about this child socially. Tell me about what their communication style is like. Yeah. And then once you kind of unpick the individual child within those 4 areas, you think, well, okay, oh, right, so they need this in place in order to do that.
Oh, I see.
So if you notice there's a difference within communication, then you can think, oh, okay, so they're not able to ask for help. Yeah. So how do we support them to ask for help? They find it difficult to start a task under information processing. They find it difficult to start a task. Okay, we've noticed that. What support do we put in to get that task started? So in my view, knowing about those areas leads you to the profile of the child and then what you can do to help them. I use it with the teenagers themselves. Yeah. One of the first things we do is profile themselves within those areas.
That's interesting.
So they're so insightful, teenagers. It's been probably one of the best things I've ever done is make that.
Yeah.
I mean, they used to scare me, but not anymore. So to take those 4 key areas of difference, break them down and talk about each element for the young person to be able to understand how they function within that. what their strengths are within that, but actually what their challenges are, and then how they can advocate for themselves within that. That's the aim of the work with the young people.
That's really...
So within that, come back round to your first question. Sensory processing is part of the diagnostic criteria. So children may be either super sensitive to sensory information, or they might be undersensitive. So we have hypersensitive and hyposensitive. We also have the 5 senses that we already know: sight, sound, touch, taste and hearing. So there may be a difference in how the brain processes information around those areas. Okay.
Yep.
And then we also have 3 other senses, and they've got great work. They've got great names.
Okay.
I love these names. So we have their sense of balance, which is their vestibular sense. So you may have a child that has difficulties with balance, keeping balance, being able to sit. Sitting cross-legged is one of the hardest positions to maintain, and yet we ask children to do it from the age of about 3.
I wonder why we do. I suppose because it's compact and neat.
I mean, possibly, and very, and very Victorian, which is what our school system is still based around. So yes, but actually, a child that lays on the floor is not doing that because they're being a pain or they're misbehaving. They may be doing that because their sense of balance means that they cannot keep the position of sitting on their bottom with their legs crossed. And how long do we ask children to do that for? From a very young age, quite a long time. Yeah.
You always, whenever you go to even sessions at the library, they expect you to sit on the floor, cross your legs and listen.
Yeah. So, if a child needs to lay on the floor, as long as they're still learning, let them lay on the floor. That's another podcast. And then we have the sense of body awareness. So understanding where your body is in space and time, relating to the processing and the messages from the brain to the limbs and other parts of the body. That's called your proprioceptive sense. If I wasn't so tired, I'd even spell it for you. It's been a busy week. And then we have our internal sensory system, our sense of interoception.
Okay.
So the brain processing information about our internal, so how fast our heart is beating. Do we need the toilet? Are we in pain? Especially like girls with menstruation and what have you, then, how that may be different for them because of this sense. So actually sensory is very, very complicated. I mean, it's a minefield in some respects. And I think we can only really, I'm not a sensory specialist. I'm an autism specialist. So I probably know more about sensory than a lot of people.
Yeah.
But it's a whole specialism in itself. You can get sensory occupational therapists. There is one working actually within this area who is amazing. If you could get her on a podcast, I'll build up a list for you here, Natasha. We have to be aware that actually our children have got their own unique profile within how the sensory works. So we have to think, well, how then can we meet some of those sensory needs? So even simple things like a coat peg being on the end rather than being in the middle of the range of coats, because we've got to think about spatial awareness, noise, people walking past you, people pushing into you to get coats. Actually, that can be quite an overwhelming experience. So can we put that young person's coat on the end of the rail so there's less, whatever going on? One of the girls I was talking with the other day said, when I'm in a classroom, she's an older one, I like to be at the back because I feel very uncomfortable with the sensory feeling that there's people behind me, that whole kind of spatial awareness of where you are in relation to other people. And I'm thinking, actually, what a simple thing to do. Just move her to the back.
Will the school move her to the back?
I have no idea, but it's been my recommendation.
No, it's just interesting to see how much it's so specialist and it's so
But I
diverse.
think if the young person is telling us that,
But will the
Let's
school
try it.
But the question is, will the school listen?
Yeah.
And will, especially if your child is younger and not necessarily completely self-aware in that at that stage, and you are as a parent will your school listen if you say, oh, actually, he doesn't like to be sat in the middle of the carpet. Can you pop him?
And is it actually that the child
back?
doesn't like to be there, or is it because they can't learn when they're there? Is it not meeting their need? So, children sat in the middle of the carpet who can't keep their balance. They get up and they sort of walk over everybody and touch everybody's heads on the way through because they can't keep their balance. Actually, is that because that child doesn't like sitting there, or is that because that child's going to learn better and we're going to meet their need better if we sit them at the edge? That's what we have to think. This isn't about whether a child likes it.
Yeah.
This isn't about whether a child will or won't do something. It's about can they? And that's a mindset that we need to change.
Me as a layperson, it presents as that child doesn't want to do it.
Yes.
But actually, that's not what I should be thinking. It should be
that they can't.
And that changes teaching completely as well.
Well, it changes. I mean, it does change a mindset, definitely. I mean, I work with some very extreme cases where young people haven't been to school for periods of time, and is this because this young person won't go to school, or is it because this young person can't go to school? And what is it that we need to change so they can, or at least try to?
Yeah.
And for some of their children, trying to do something is a huge step, which should be celebrated. And I think we just assume that children can come into school in reception, can sit on a carpet, know who's in charge without actually being told, and, know how to listen to the teacher and do what the teacher says. How do children just know that? Well, neurotypical children do, but neurodivergent children, autistic children don't.
And if you don't know that your child is neurodivergent yet,
yes,
and maybe you suspect it, but you're not sure, you're just thinking, they're a little bit different.
Yes,
but they conform more or less all the other time. How do you then?
And I think what happens is it's then put down to behaviour. Well, behaviour is an action. That's all it is.
Yeah.
Behaviour is an action. And unfortunately, when we talk about behaviour, we automatically have a negative connotation to it. Nobody says to you, I want to talk to you about your child's behaviour and it be good.
That's very
true. Do they?
No.
They only want to talk to you about your child's behaviour because it's bad. Okay, bad. I'm doing inverted commas here. I need to have a little set that I just kind of hold up on a stick. But behaviour is action, and that action is telling us something. So if a child comes into school in the morning and their action is that they smile at me, then I assume that they're happy and pleased to see me. But if a child comes in and cries when they see me, not necessarily see me, but when they come in and they cry, that's still a behaviour that's telling me something.
Yeah.
But I have to think, why is that child doing that? Always think why. One little tip that I actually really like using this, and I have used it with teenagers themselves, is we do the iceberg model of behaviour. So I draw an iceberg, and as we know, as the Titanic very well knew, we only see the very tip of the iceberg, but there's a lot going on underneath. So I break down with these youngsters, and you could do this about a child that you know. So your own child, or if you're an educator, a child in your class. What behaviour do we see is the tip of the iceberg, the observable behaviour.
Okay.
So with a young person, I might say, right, what do teachers see? So, just kind of thinking of some examples. Oh, they might think I'm rude. Get that quite a lot. I'm rude. They see me walk out of class. They see me walking around school. They might see me cry. They might hear me swear. They're all the observable behaviours. And then we look at what it actually is driving that behaviour.
Yeah.
So what is going on underneath?
Yeah.
And from talking, this is why the teenagers have actually brought my career on so much, is that they're able to say, that teacher talks too fast and I get lost in the lesson. By the time they're on PowerPoint page 3, I'm still processing number 1. well, that would make me cry. That would make me give up. That would make me put my head on the desk, which can be the observable behaviour. I'm anxious. The room's too noisy. I'm not sat in the right place. I get very overwhelmed by this time of the day. Now, teenagers can tell us that, and I always think that's very insightful. And I always get them to take a photo of what we've written down on their phone as well to look back at, or show somebody. Yeah. Show someone, that this is,
this is what's going on.
This is what's going on. Obviously, our youngsters, our little ones, can't tell us that. So we're likely to see more behaviour. They're trying to tell us. Yeah. So we have to be a little bit of a detective. And the better we know the child, the more maybe we look for patterns, then the more we're able to make an adjustment and put maybe something in place. Even something simple like, going back to a story of when I was a Senko about 14 years ago, actually, I had a young girl on my SEN register, and she was very physically aggressive towards people, and she would scratch and what have you. And obviously this was becoming a problem. So it took us quite a while to work this out. But when the teacher said, go and get your water bottle to the class, every other child knew that meant have a drink. But she didn't, because the teacher didn't say have a drink. The teacher said, get your water bottle.
So she took it as get your water bottle.
Get your water bottle, but she wasn't drinking from it. So she was actually really dehydrated and cranky through the day. And Mum was saying, she comes home, she drinks like a litre of water. And we were like, God, is this child diabetic? Blah, 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 blah. Yeah. So we did a little bit of observation, and we realised that actually she wasn't drinking from her water bottle. She was getting the water bottle, but nobody had actually said, you need to get your water bottle and then drink from it. So she wasn't drinking from it. So what we did was we recognised this pattern, and we put in a little water break with a member of staff who also happened to like Pokemon. So that was the good connection. Always make the connection. And they just used to, the end of break time or before break, after lunch, go to the water machine, fill up the water bottle, have a drink, walk back to class. And actually all of those incidences stopped. So that was so we could have looked at that behaviour in two ways, couldn't we?
Yeah, definitely.
We could have thought, oh my God, this child is really aggressive, let's exclude her. Or we could just take that little bit of time to look behind, look under the water at the main bit of the iceberg and see what's going on. And I appreciate that we haven't always got time, but I think we owe it to our children to make a bit of time. Am I allowed to say that? Is that very controversial? Because if we don't, how can we want to, what's the impact of that on a child if they don't get that support? Going back to what I said earlier, they fill in their own narrative about who they are and what they're like.
You could end up with a child who gets excluded, but didn't need things to get that extreme if earlier on little things were noticed. But it's
I agree.
It's really tough. I suppose it's bringing teachers to this real awareness of the fact that actually we're so different. You need to take notice of the differences.
I've been a primary school teacher, and I know that, I did 20 years in the classroom, and I know that you need to be an absolute jack of all trades. Yeah. And it's harder now. It's so much harder now than when I started teaching. When I started teaching, the national curriculum had only just come in. SATs had only just come in. We spent a lot of our time doing our own thing and having a lovely creative time. But, things have changed since then. Yeah. But there are some of our children that still need to have a lovely creative time. How do we make space for what our children are good at as well? Not as a reward. We shouldn't be saying, well, you sit on the carpet on your bottom for 10 minutes and then you can have 5 minutes, looking at the dinosaurs, because our child doesn't need rewarding for sitting on the carpet. Yeah. What we need is, you can have 5 minutes, your daily 5 minutes in the morning of looking at the dinosaurs to enable that child to feel relaxed, feel that they can achieve other things. And I think it's really important that what are we rewarding? Got me on a whole another subject here, but actually if we have rewards for our children that are autistic, what are we rewarding them for?
You're almost subconsciously telling them that their normal is not, you're not validating it. You're making them feel that they have to behave like everybody else to get a reward. But why can't they be themselves and still get a reward?
And if somebody needs glasses to do a piece of work and we said, well, when you've done that piece of work, then you can have your glasses back. We would not do that, would we?
No, we wouldn't do that.
We wouldn't say to a child with mobility issues, right, do the 100 metres at sports day and then you can have your walking frame back. We wouldn't do that. We wouldn't reward them with something that they actually essentially need. Yeah. And our autistic children need movement breaks. Yeah. They need work chunked into smaller amounts of time. They need to have some of that time of their own interest incorporated into the day, but not as a reward for being less autistic than you really are. Again, it's a change of mindset.
It's an awareness that needs to be brought out, and I feel almost that it needs to be brought also to the children in a way, to teach them that, just because my friend gets 5 minutes looking at the dinosaur, it's not a reward, it's actually something they need, like that kind of normalizing everything so that there's an
and I
understanding
think things
of
like ear defenders and things like that. Sometimes people say, I've heard parents say, I don't want my child wearing ear defenders because it makes them stand out. And I'd say, but your child sat under the table screaming with their fingers in their ears makes them stand out more than ear defenders. Sorry to be blunt, but that is true. But actually, how do we make that available for anybody that needs them? So, you as a teacher could put ear defenders on while you're doing something to show that this is something that is access. If I was teaching again, I would have a set of ear defenders that anybody could come to. Yeah. So it's kind of a normalised thing that maybe we all need a little bit of peace and quiet at some point. I'd have spaces where we don't just sit at a chair. Some of our children are much better if they work standing up, or they're sat on a beanbag, or they're laid on the floor on their tummy due to sensory, the pressure from the hard floor. Sensory can help them work. I know it's tricky, but I think that thinking outside the box and being creative on, showing that we don't need to buy in loads and loads of equipment to meet the need of children. We can do quite simple tweaks sometimes. So where do we have the visual representation of things going on? Actually, within autism, visual thinking is a real strength. If we just tell our children, they can't hold on to that information. I've got here, and so have you, a list of questions for today. That is our visual support.
Yeah.
And, we're referring to it. We need it. We allow ourselves to have that. So why do we not give visual supports to our children? Why do we tell them loads of information and expect them to hold on to it?
Teaching needs a revolution.
Oh my God. It would be lovely to have a revolution.
I suppose
I know a head teacher that can lead it.
But it just needs, it needs a little revolution, I think. It sounds that way. Because if more and more children are being diagnosed,
which they are,
that means more and more children are in a mainstream setting,
absolutely.
Which they should be.
Yes, there are children that should be in a mainstream setting, absolutely. There are children that should be in a special setting, but unfortunately there are a real lack of spaces. So children who need special education may be in a mainstream school, and we have to be aware. This is where the major change has happened, is that there are more and more children with higher levels of needs in our mainstream schools, but things haven't necessarily changed in order to meet that. I mean, going, for anybody that kind of is a bit nerdy, maybe that's me. When I did my master's dissertation, one of the things that I looked at was the Warnock report from 1978, which stated that teachers felt unprepared and not have enough knowledge to meet the needs of children with special educational needs in their classrooms. 1978. So can you tell me what's changed in nearly 50 years?
I bet nothing. I bet teachers still feel unprepared and undertrained and potentially not heard because their needs are not being met.
And yet there are, I'm very lucky in a way that now that I work independently, I do offer a service of training and parent classes, parent courses to a couple of commissioned bits of work that I do. And then I know your child is at a school that I know the head, so some support has been brought in, which, obviously you came to the first coffee morning that I did. And teachers have had a training videos package and that as well. So there is training and that is out there, it's kind of what is the school priority?
Yeah.
And you know, schools have a huge amount of things that they have to do. And, you know, what's their priority?
Oh, it makes you feel a little bit sad, doesn't it?
Yes, it's almost like, you know, what is the most needy thing and within the school, and how do we reach it? And so what drops off the edge almost, you know. And I think actually it's good that people are aware and know that, you know, it's not an easy job. I know when I first started teaching, somebody said to me, so you work from 9 till 3 and you have loads of holidays. And yeah, I don't think I punched them, but probably felt like it.
But it's not true. I think people don't realise there's lesson prepping, there's lesson planning, there's risk assessments, so I taught part-time, I taught adults part-time, and the amount of work I did outside our 2-hour lesson, I felt like I had a 9-to-5 full-time job, even though it was meant to be just part-time. But there is a lot of prep.
I mean, when I came out of the classroom, you know, my husband said, does this mean we get Sundays now? Because we've not had Sundays for like 20 odd years, you know. Sorry, dear. Long-suffering teacher's husband. Well, we've just had our 30th wedding anniversary, so you know, something's worked alongside along the line.
But teachers work incredibly hard. Anybody I think in education does work extremely hard, and they do try really, you know, they're up.
I think this is where we've got to, you know, if I go in and see a child and I give recommendations, you know, sometimes I could make loads of recommendations, but there's no point because people will become very overwhelmed by that. It's better to take 1 or 2 things and try to do them well than it is look at a thing and think, I can't do any of that because there's too much. And I think that's something that always, from any training that I've done or any parent course that I've done, is think about one thing that you could change for that child, even if that one thing is that you step back for 2 minutes and watch them. Because I think the most underrated and kind of looked over, if you like, tool that we have in our toolbox as teachers, which is most powerful, is that we can observe. And I think if you step back, so if I was, for example, I might want to step back and watch a child come to the carpet. How do they navigate the space that they're going to sit in? Do they communicate with anybody? Are they facing the right way? Some of our children don't know which way to face. You know, but if you just step back just for 2 minutes, I know it can be hard, or somebody or your LSA, step back for 2 minutes and just watch that child. You can learn so much, and that costs nothing.
Do you think parents can do that as well?
Absolutely.
As in just spend that time to actually observe your child and...
Yeah. Because I think, you know, when you're a parent, you're living it and, you know, you're in the moment a lot of the time. You don't have the time to watch and reflect, but that is so important. I mean, I'm in a very luxurious position. I get to watch, I get to reflect. Yeah. That's part of my job, and that's why I pick up so much when I see a child, because that's all I'm there to do. But actually, it's a very powerful tool and can tell us a lot about a child, you know. And then when we see certain things, we think, what behaviour is communication? Yeah. Right, we've seen the tip of the iceberg. What actually is it that's driving that behaviour? What's going on for that child? Yeah. How are they processing that? What's the challenge? Right, let's see if this works. And it may just be one thing. It may just be where they're sitting. It may be that you need to get some visuals in place. Visuals at home as well. Yeah. I use a wonderful software called Widget Online. I'm not commissioned for it by any but I always promote it. So it's a computer software program. I pay monthly for it. I make loads of visual supports. So my Facebook page has been a little bit redundant recently. I haven't been using it, but there are lots of examples on there of how I've used visual supports. And you can have a home package. I think you pay something like £5 a month or something, and you can make as many visuals as you like for your child.
And just help ease routine or anything like that.
Yeah, build up routines, lower anxiety around what's happening, because the child can look at the visual. Yeah. Speech is said and gone. You know that in one ear and out the other phrase. Yeah. But a visual is a permanent reminder of what's been said. And our children, as I said earlier, are visual thinkers. Actually, let's provide them with what they're good at.
And what they need.
To help them.
We have unpacked so much that needs more unpacking, but maybe that's actually autism, because it is a spectrum, it's diverse, and you could probably talk for years and still learn something new at the end of it. So
absolutely. Remember that phrase? The minute you think you know it all. Did I say this on the podcast?
You did.
Not?
The minute you know it all.
Always the minute is the time that you should get out. So, I'm still here and I'm still learning. And really, I feel very privileged to work with the young people that I work with. They've changed my career path.
Your knowledge is now being shared with other people and changing their perceptions of what they thought they knew and bringing a better understanding.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. The world is there for all of us, isn't it? And, these young people, have got the potential to bring something wonderful to the world. But school is a challenge.
But hopefully, with more knowledge, more training, it won't be so much of a challenge because we'll be able to open up the world.
And there's, places like the National Autistic Society, which is the biggest charity in this country for autism. Started off as a parent group in the 1960s and is now the biggest charity in this country for autism. They have loads of information and training videos that you can buy access to. The Autism Education Trust is another website that has got lots of information for teachers and, training packages and things. There is stuff out there. If you decide to do some research yourselves, be very careful. If you go on to websites that talk about a cure, you are not on the right things. There is no cure for autism. This is the way that the brain is developing. We don't want to change. There's nothing to be changed or fixed or cured about our children. So, within the UK, we work to the social model of disability, which means that there is nothing wrong with the person. It's the environment around them that needs to change. Other areas of the world work to the medical model of disability, in that there is something wrong with the person and they need to change. If you find yourself looking at those things, you're not looking at what the UK's model of disability is. And although, it's kind of a bit of a balance, is autism a disability? It is actually classed as a disability.
Is that because it can be to such a level that you need a lot more support?
I mean, the person is disabled by the fact that the environment around them doesn't suit their needs.
Okay, that makes sense. Yeah, so
we don't want to change the person themselves. We need to change what's around them in order for them to be able to be the best version of themselves that they can be, which is what we want. We wouldn't have some great things have happened throughout history if we didn't have people that were these neurodivergent thinkers.
Thank you so much, Sarah, for your time. It's been insightful, enjoyable, fun, and I've learned so much. So thank you very much. I hope you come back.
I always want to talk about autism.
But thank you very much.
Thank you for joining us on today's episode, and we truly appreciate you listening. Don't forget to turn on your notifications, subscribe, and follow to stay updated on future episodes. We look forward to seeing you next week.